Dark Souls 2 is easily one of the most hated games in the series, but it's also my most played and replayed game of all time. This video's title isn't just clickbait. I am genuinely obsessed with Dark Souls 2, and hopefully if you stick around, you'll understand why. With that being said, hey, I'm Ray, and this is Obsession, a new series where we discuss whether a game truly deserves to take up our time and our lives. Today, we're going to discuss why this game holds such a special place in my heart, despite its reputation. If you clicked on this video, you probably already have strong opinions about Dark Souls 2. Whether you're a diehard fan like me, feel the game should never have been made, or you've only heard the complaints and are staying away from it. It's important that we start by looking at these common critiques the game faces. I'll address most of these as the video goes on, and some of them I even think hold merit, and I won't dispute them. The first is the existence of the adaptability stat, and its effect on iframes. Second, that the boss pool is bloated with mostly forgettable guys in armor. Third, that the layout of the world is bad compared to Dark Souls 1. Fourth, that certain areas, like the Shrine of Amana and the Frigid Outskirts, are just unforgivable. And finally, the amount of gank fights. There are several other critiques, such as movement being locked to 8 directions, hitboxes being odd, soul memory mechanic, soul gems being introduced, forgettable NPCs compared to Dark Souls 1, which I just disagree with, considering how much I love characters like Lucatiel and Gavlon. Essentially, this rapid-fire list, among with other critiques, can be summed up as, but that's not how they did it in Dark Souls 1. Yeah, it's a sequel. It's supposed to be a different game, and they're gonna try new things. Sometimes you might not prefer that to the old way, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad, just different. Anyway, I could dedicate the whole video to defending Dark Souls 2, but let's be honest, a pre-recorded YouTube video is not the best format for a civilized discourse. Regardless, that's not what this video is. While I feel like I have to address the critiques I put forth earlier, as it sort of seems mandatory when covering this game, my main goal is to talk about why Dark Souls 2 has captured and held my attention so tightly, and, teaser, talk about what I want to do about that fact with this series moving forward. Since I grew up in American academia, I'll let you know up front that this Obsession view will follow sort of a multi-point essay style. There are 4 major areas that I want to cover that I think Dark Souls 2 does particularly well. As a matter of fact, if any game excels in these areas, it's very likely to get me obsessed. Those areas are meaningful build variety, the uniqueness of each run, how easy it is to replay, and just having fun and unique mechanics. Let's start by talking about the strength that Dark Souls 2 surpasses its predecessor in: build variety. So I could easily just point out the fact that while Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 each have about 120 and 150 weapons respectively, Dark Souls 2 has over 200 weapons to choose from. However, I want to be a little bit more nuanced than that, since I personally think that there is a difference between build variety and meaningful build variety. While build variety could look at a sample of 10 different straight swords and say that there's a lot of variety, this is a random number, don't think too much about that, but meaningful aspect of that build variety could take that same 10 and say, well, there's 3 different movesets, similar damage across the board, and 2 general weapon lengths. So while there's a variety of 10 to choose from, only maybe 6 of them really matters if you choose them. This is a simplification of the concept, but I hope it paints the picture. So if we just look at melee weapons, there are about 18 different weapon varieties, covering everything from daggers to great hammers, and halberds to twin blades. Each of these 18 varieties has their own weapons within them, many having unique movesets. In addition, the game even has shields that are meant to be melee weapons, increasing this number further. Then add in mechanics like sweet spots and power stancing, and the variety just goes up even further. A quick side note, I know people tend to not like the sweet spot mechanic, or the fact that you deal reduced damage when you go into negative stamina, but I actually really love both of these mechanics because I think they make a lot of sense. If I'm swinging a big massive sword and hit you in the dead center with the full force of the swing, that's gonna hurt a lot more than if I just clip you at the tip of the blade. Likewise, I don't know if you've ever done anything like lifting weights or pushed a set to failure, but the human body doesn't work perfectly just until it stops. You lose steam, and the last rep is slower and usually just a partial rep. Likewise, if you land a flurry of blows and go until you can't go anymore, the last swing is probably going to be a lot less effective than the first. I'll concede that these mechanics can definitely take away some enjoyment, but for me they kind of add immersion, which I appreciate. Anyway, back to meaningful build variety. We talked about the sheer number of weapon types, but once you add in unique boss weapons with their own mechanics, and my favorite aspect, power stancing, if you want to play a melee-focused character in Dark Souls 2, you've got dozens upon dozens of hours of content ahead of you. That's just melee. Add in the variety from different casting types, hybrid builds, different armors. Despite beating the game dozens of times, I'm nowhere near exhausting the amount of variety this game boasts. Even once you pick a weapon to focus on, you have more choices. I've always been a big fan of strength builds, and my first playthrough of any Souls game has always seemed to end with either a giant great hammer, or usually some form of Berserk's Dragon Slayer greatsword. Let's use the greatsword for this example. Cool, I've chosen a weapon, and the fact that I want to be a pure strength build. Now, I still have to choose. Do I want to two-hand the greatsword, balancing dodging and defense and stamina management, forego defense and just power stance two giant swords, or lose out on a little bit of offense and use a shield in the left hand? This actually leads into one of the most hated aspects of the game, adaptability. If I choose the shield option, I can completely ignore adaptability and just dump more stats into vigor, endurance, and vitality, creating an unbreakable brick wall. However, if I want to focus on dodging, I do need to invest in adaptability. For some reason, people hate this. I think it's a cool RPG progression system. It requires some thinking ahead. Okay, sure. I have to dedicate 15 of my levels to ADP so that my iframes can match what Dark Souls 1 started as. Who cares? I end most of my Dark Souls 1 playthroughs somewhere between level 70 and 90. That's just playing casually. In Dark Souls 2, even when running from boss to boss and skipping most areas, it would be rare to end a playthrough and not see level 120. If I use the Silver Serpent Ring, and if I kill Malin for the Saldore set, I could easily hit 150 by the end of the game without trying. So saying it's a resource sink is a pretty weak criticism in my book. Not to mention, you get so many levels early in the game. The first boss in Dark Souls 1 gives 2,000 souls. The first boss in Dark Souls 2 gives 10,000 souls. Heck, you don't even have to fight the Dragon Rider to get 12,000 souls. And as I alluded to, I personally love games that make you feel like you're progressing. Starting out weak, barely able to dodge an attack without expert timing, then 5 hours later, getting better at dodging most attacks, then 5 hours into that, you're basically unhittable because of your adaptability. To me, this is a fun progression. If you've ever played a game like Kingdom Come Deliverance, that game does this with all aspects of your character, literally taking you from a zero to a hero. The thing about Dark Souls 2, however, is if you want, you can just run straight to the last giant, or even the Dragon Rider, and pump those 10,000 souls into ADP and never have to worry about it again. And, like I mentioned above, you could just ignore the stat and block or parry everything, rather than dodge. Yes, it takes time to find a 100 defense shield, but again, it makes you feel like you're progressing in the game once you do find one. That idea of I want to dodge or block can totally change how you approach a playthrough, which leads to the second strength of Dark Souls 2. Each playthrough can feel unique compared to the last. The build variety and playstyle difference lend a big hand in this, but so do other aspects of the game. Another criticism of Dark Souls 2 is that the world feels disconnected compared to the original interwoven map design of Dark Souls 1. And while I agree to an extent with this sentiment, I never saw this as a disadvantage of the game, for a couple reasons. First, that interconnected design feels most meaningful on an initial playthrough, in my opinion. I can't deny how cool it was to clear the Taurus demon for the first time and unlock the ladder down to the bonfire you came from earlier. Or how you could see Sen's fortress in the distance when the Raven dropped you into Lordran for the first time, and after weaving through the map, actually ending up there. It's cool, I get it. However, after the first or second playthrough, you kinda tend to find the most efficient path through the game, and then I begin to see the whole thing as a straight line with a couple of branching paths. The coolness, at least for me, is lost. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, admittedly doesn't have these cool moments of, whoa, I was just here. Instead, I was often filled with a feeling of, I can't wait to see what craziness is up ahead. Each path to the Great Ones is thematic and lends to the story of cycles and fallen kingdoms. The infamous Earthen Peak elevator for many caused groans, but for me, caused wonder. Holy crap, there's a whole lava kingdom above here. Did I teleport? Did I go back in time? Skip forward in time? I don't know. While Dark Souls 1 leans into a grounded approach, Dark Souls 2 really leans into wonder. I'm not saying that this is necessarily better or worse, just that I strongly prefer it. This disconnected design of the 4 Great Souls actually allows for more varied paths through the game, each being valid with their own strengths. If you're doing a challenge run and get stuck at a boss, try another route for a while, come back stronger. Do you want to rush down each path, checking the Great Ones off a list one at a time? Go for it. Or, if you're like me, do you rush through the Forest of the Giants, get to Macduff's Trove of Titanite, then switch paths, grab some Titanite chunks from Earthen Peaks, then pivot again to the Seldore Cove to grab a stash of chunks and slabs, getting a plus 10 weapon in the first handful of hours? You can do that too. This disconnected early part of the game ironically helps open up the options a lot more than a tightly designed interwoven map. I'll concede that it isn't as cool, but in my opinion, I still prefer it. That's just how the map adds to the uniqueness of each run. Then, and honestly a far less contentious point as far as I'm aware, you have the addition of Bonfire ascetics to the game. This ability to jump straight into a new game cycle for one area of the map opens up a whole nother list of choices. Do I want to farm this easy boss for extra souls at the trade-off of making the surrounding area harder? Does this boss drop a soul exclusive to New Game Plus and beyond that I really want? Pop an ascetic or two and get it early. Did I screw myself over in a challenge run not realizing I physically can't beat this boss? I can just use an ascetic to grind another boss until I exceed the 1,000,000 souls needed to bypass the Shrine of Winter. This all leads to another great point. New Game Plus is actually meaningful in Dark Souls 2. I think I've only ever played New Game Plus in Dark Souls 1 once, and that was just to try it out. Then I decided it was more fun to just start over and watch a new character progress. Dark Souls 2, however, actually gives you a reason to want to do New Game Plus. There are different enemy placements, there's new boss mechanics, heck, there's new jump scares. I actually don't want to show footage of this one because it genuinely scared me the first time a certain boss jumped on a cliff where they weren't supposed to be. I think that's something that you should experience yourself rather than see it secondhand. And like I said earlier, whether you're actually progressing to New Game Plus or just using Bonfire ascetics, some weapons are even locked to later playthroughs. I think this is a really cool and awesome incentive to actually interact with this fun and unique mechanic that makes each playthrough a little different than the last. The next thing that makes me keep coming back to Dark Souls 2 and replaying it over and over again is that it's really fun and easy to replay. There's no unskippable cutscenes, no lengthy unskippable dialogue, or mandatory hours-long tutorial that keeps you from getting to the core of the game. This point isn't a comparison against the other Souls games because the whole series does this really well. An example of a game that I love that is terrible when it comes to replay value is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, another one of my all-time favorite games that I rarely replay due to its prologue. Encountering Skull Kid in the woods, making your way through the forest, talking to the happy mask salesman, helping the Great Fairy, talking to the bombers, getting the moon tier, getting to the clock tower, waiting and waiting until midnight for the tower to open, shooting the Skull Kid, getting the ocarina, the Zelda cutscene, talking to the happy mask salesman again, all just to be able to officially start the game is a really big turnoff when it comes to replayability. Meanwhile, in Dark Souls 2, you run through the things betwixt, make your character, run to Majula, and you're off. If a game has a lengthy intro that drags on and outstays its welcome in subsequent playthroughs, this really detracts from the game becoming a true obsession of mine. The final major section I want to cover is unique mechanics and overall experience. I covered a lot of the unique mechanics earlier, Bonfire, ascetics, power stancing. Another common critique of the game is the torch system. I, again, personally found this to be a really fun selling point in this game. I really like it when games make you think about light sources in the dark, and give you the necessary items up front. Using the Skull Lantern in Dark Souls 1 to get through the Tomb of the Giants is really cool, if I didn't have to navigate over halfway through the map before getting the lantern. Dark Souls 2 gives you torches early and gives you torches often. I like having to decide whether I want to sacrifice a little bit of extra damage from two-handing or a little extra defense by putting away my shield just to hold a torch so that I can see where I'm going. In some areas, the torch not only lets you see better, but actually interacts with the enemies in the area. Sacrificing a little bit of your offense or defense so that you can navigate Seldore with a torch and bring it all the way to the Freya fight and then nullify the annoying spiders is a really cool trade-off. While on the topic of torches, I want to make a quick tangent. Dark Souls 2 gets a lot of hate for the idea of having to burn down the windmill that's made of stone and metal in order to drain a poison swamp to make the Mytha fight easier. They say it doesn't make sense, and how could I possibly find that out without looking it up? And I'm not necessarily going to defend that choice as much as point something else out. While burning the windmill definitely makes the fight easier, it isn't required to beat the fight. You can still interact with all other content in the game without doing it. And you can look it up. The online information is out there. Meanwhile, when Dark Souls 1 DLC released, something that people paid money to get more content to interact with, it took a while for the community to figure out the steps of killing the Hydra, killing the Golden Golem, getting the pendant, finding the portal to Ulasil. People had to look this up to figure it out as well. And they paid extra money on top of the game for this. And they can't interact with the DLC until they figure out those obscure steps. Is the windmill stupid? Yes. Does that make it worse than Dark Souls 1? No. There's plenty of things in all of the Dark Souls games that don't make sense and probably would never have been figured out on your own. Sorry. I know it's not necessarily the largest critique laid out against Dark Souls 2, but it's probably the one that pisses me off the most. I'm not even sure why, but let's get back to the actual video. I know I've covered the 4 major points that I wanted to, but there are still a few criticisms that I feel like needed addressed. Dark Souls 2 gets a lot of criticism for bosses just being dudes in armor, and that there are way too many gank fights in the game. However, I think that these are actually both strengths and contribute to me liking the game so much. My favorite enemies and bosses have always, and probably always will be, humanoid knights. They're balanced fighters that rival the character themselves. Is it as memorable to see the Dragon Rider, a guy in armor standing in a tower on a platform, compared to seeing the gaping dragon crawl out of the depths for the first time? No. Do I enjoy the gaping dragon, or several demon fights in Dark Souls 1? No. Dark Souls combat is at its best when you're fighting other humanoid enemies. Dark Souls 1 has Ornstein and Smough, Knight Artorias. Dark Souls 3 has the Nameless King, Champion Gundyr, the Soul of Cinder, Gale, and so on. This series has always been at its best when you're fighting enemies that can mirror the player in some way. As for the gank fights, this is honestly just a preference thing. I like having to work on crowd control, having to keep track of the ruined sentinels and wait for the perfect time to strike, forcing aggression against the Belfry gargoyles to take them out before the next one comes to life and overwhelms you. I could take or leave the Royal Rat Guard dogs, because they kinda suck, But I like knowing when to run past an area versus when to take your time and slowly take out enemies one at a time. It forces pressure on the player to slow down and take in their surroundings. It forces preparation and forethought, and not just to run into every room you come across swinging. Areas like the Iron Keep and the Shrine of Amana are notoriously frustrating if you play like Dark Souls 1. But if you slow down, especially if you used a ranged weapon like the bow, these areas really aren't that bad. I enjoy games that, while not requiring it, encourage the player to use the multiple tools that they're given to get a job done. For instance, while I love the Monster Hunter series, I've always felt let down that the best way to play is to just make a one-size-fits-all build that does raw damage and crits, rather than making status effect builds and elemental builds super viable. I like when games give you a large kit and make it worthwhile to actually use the tools given to you. Another area that often gets hated on is the frigid outskirts. And I have a really cool tip to help you deal with this and never get frustrated with it again. Are you ready for this? Just walk away. Seriously, the area sucks. I can't defend it. It's easily a top contender for one of the lowest lows in the series, rivaling the Bed of Chaos for me. But, unlike the Bed of Chaos, the frigid outskirts are totally optional. It's cool that they give you a big summoning pool to have a bunch of backup against the reindeers, and whoever survives the wastes can help you out with Luddensallen. But again, it's totally optional. There's nobody making you play through that area. In the dozens of playthroughs, over hundreds of hours of me playing Dark Souls 2, I've beaten Luddensallen 3 times. Once as intended with the party of NPCs, once solo to prove that I could, and once in New Game Plus when I did an all-boss run. That's it. And frankly, that's enough for me. I don't mind if optional content is bad in games, since it's optional. Bad extra content doesn't ruin a strong core experience. However, a bad portion of the core experience can ruin the rest of the game, and any extras that might have otherwise been great. If I want to play Dark Souls 1, I have to beat the Bed of Chaos in order to complete a run and enjoy the other highs of that game. The frigid wastes, I can just walk away from. There are definitely more criticisms I could refute, and definitely more about this game that I could just gush and obsess over, but I hope I've shown you why the most hated Souls game is the game I find myself most obsessed with. At least I've explained it from a mechanical standpoint. From a personal standpoint as well, this game is really important to me. As a matter of fact, the whole Dark Souls series is. They've gotten me through some really tough times in life, helped me practice letting go when something bad happens, and fostered some really positive relationships in my life. Throughout the video, I compared Dark Souls 2 to its predecessor, and it may sound like I'm really ragging on Dark Souls 1, but I want to say this explicitly. I love Dark Souls 1 as well. However, Dark Souls 2 will always hold a special place in my heart. I will always remember coming home from my first shift at a hospital. I covered 2 deaths. One of them was a child. I remember coming home emotionally shaken, sitting down to start a new playthrough of Dark Souls 2 just to help relax my mind enough to get a little bit of sleep that night. I don't consider Dark Souls 2 to be the best game I've ever played. I don't even think it's necessarily the best game FROMSOFT has ever made. But it will always be a favorite of mine, and a game I will encourage others to give a try. I don't think it deserves the hate that it gets. I truly do think that it comes down to, do you prefer Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2? I don't think either one is bad. Sorry about the sappiness there at the end. I want to take the last portion of this video to kind of talk about where I want to go from here. I've thoroughly enjoyed making this video, and I think that this new series, Obsession, is going to be a mainstay on this channel. While this video covered a game that I'm already obsessed about, I want to use this as an opportunity to make my way through my backlog and find new games to obsess about. Those games are going to range from things like other FROMSOFT IPs like Armored Core, other Souls-like games, Neo, The Surge, and so on, but I also may want to branch out to other genres as well. I have a game called Valkyria Chronicles in my backlog that I've really wanted to play for a long time. I know I've only really covered Dark Souls and Skyrim, but I'm a big fan of tactic games too. But since I'll be focusing on games that I'm not intimately familiar with, it's gonna take me a while to play through these games. I have a full-time job and a family that I need to spend time with as well. So my video production schedule is going to drop quite a bit from the once a week. I could maybe see myself doing an Obsession video every 4 to 6 weeks at best. I don't necessarily want to go that long without videos though, so I'll keep posting things like dumb questions if you guys have more things that you want me to cover. In addition, I have some other formats that have been floating around in my head, but even these won't be weekly posts. I think I'm going to go down to a video every other week. That way I can batch some of these smaller videos and really spend my focus on this series where I get to have these longer conversations with you all, and hopefully start a dialogue in the comments of, have you tried Dark Souls 2? What are your gripes with it? Did I change your mind about anything? Do you love this game as much as me? Probably not, but possibly. Anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling and just say that I hope to see you again soon, and in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope that you know that you truly matter in this world. Take care.